coming out today. And as we do talk about what's known as the English Revolution and the significance thereof, we always think about the tragedies of war and royal executions. But we also think, in fact, about what it all leads to in terms of parliamentary authority and the rights of people, both men and women. But just like good cooking, sometimes it'll take time, lots of time, for all of this to be realized. In our period, of course, we are dealing with only a part of it because, you know, in my day, 13th century, we have things going on too, like Magna Carta. So this Johnny-come-lately period is part and parcel. But as I say, to develop the freedom that we enjoy today, it takes a lot of time, as we all know. And among the major figures here are clearly King Charles I and Mr. Godly himself, Oliver Cromwell, one of the most fascinating figures that I talk about, I think. Whether or not you like him, I guess, is a matter of personal taste. My opinion. We start with the tree just so we have Charles I placed in a correct position. For those who are interested in genealogical charts, you'll be aware that his marriage to a French Catholic is not necessarily popular among many people because of her religion and to a certain extent because of her being French. I think it's rather interesting that her father had converted to Catholicism. He is the famous King Henry IV, who is alleged to have said Paris is well worth a mass and will convert to Catholicism. But presumably after he converted, he will become very enthusiastic in the faith, because certainly his daughter was. Maybe it's a fact that once she comes to England amidst all these non-Catholics, it will make her even more fervent. Apparently, after a time, it became a true love match. And yes, the stuff of novels. So there will be lots written about them. But you can see their children there, and I'll note that just in passing. The future King Charles II, the future King James II, and there were the daughter Mary, who will be married into the Dutch family. And finally, Henrietta, who will be married to a member of the French royal family. And more of all of that in the future, but just to understand that this marriage will be very important for the future of Charles I, obviously, and very important for England itself. Now, what have I done?
Oh, you're good.
Okay. One of the most important parts is getting to share the art, because this was a period of Rubens and Van Dyck. And when you're in London and go to the National Gallery and National Portrait Gallery, you can see all these collections and you think, Lord, they must have been spending a lot of money. Because I'm assuming Rubens and Van Dyck weren't saying, shoot, I'm just glad to be painting for y'all. You just don't worry about it. No, That's not true. It's a lie. They got the big bucks, and there were lots of these paintings. And there's the doggy. You always know they will get that dog in there. And this will be only the first of the two children. That is to say, and they're always so cute when they're little, aren't they? I don't know. It's great they're so cute because it doesn't last, but they are very cute then when you see them. Charles himself and what will become his very loving wife, Henrietta Maria, will have presumably some very happy times and some very sad ones, because he was really not meant to be king. You will recall that his older brother had really been the chosen one, and Charles becomes king only sort of by default, because that's who's left when King James I dies. He would have presumably been good as archbishop or a gentleman, but not so much as king. No affairs. He is all into marriage and monogamy. You say, gosh, how strange. I know. There are no out of school stories to tell. Isn't that wonderful? I mean, just once in a while, you get somebody who really loves the spouse, and you think, God, these people, what's wrong with them? But that's him. And so the idea of that mutual love seems to have been true. Now, there are minuses. Obviously, for an individual who should have been king, there are many reasons. You hear tales that he stammered, he was shy, he like a lot of us didn't like people who disagreed with him. And we'll meet a lot of those. But he was simply not that distinguished an individual. And that happens. I mean, you know, mediocrity. And nobody wants to be called that, but it's true in many ways that he's just an individual who's put in an almost impossible situation. We can't all be Queen Elizabeth, right? I mean, it's like you find somebody like that, the last of the Tudors, and you think, well, then every other monarch can be like this. Well, no, they can't. And he couldn't either. And we're going to see all the problems, some of which he was responsible for and some of which he inherited. We say the great spending that occurred under Queen Elizabeth and that would go on under King James, he would inherit. So he would have to deal with financial issues, and he would have to deal with a parliament. And, you know, you can't say it, I guess, too often, even though I know it gets boring to hear. It's like the people in Parliament get more and more assertive. You gave us this, and now we want that. And no one in Parliament's ever going to say, well, we're just grateful to do this, and now we just want to be obedient and quiet and well-behaved. It's just, that is just not reality, particularly as the class of people get more and more educated. And of course, as we'll see in Parliament, frankly, religion has a lot to do with their view. Money too, but also, of course, their belief that God made us all and therefore we have rights. and our rights are important. And so you be telling me everything. I want to tell you a few things. So a little sassy. If you are, of course, King Charles, it is said he looks at his wife's family over in Paris and said, wow, I wish I could be like them. Man, they don't have to do anything. You say, yeah, well, that French Revolution's coming. Well, but not to this course, not to a class near you. Right now, we're talking about England, and the English monarchy didn't have the resources at that point as the French. And so the idea of saying, I'm called by God, and God and I are in charge. And so that idea, is for most of us, I guess, is personified by Louis XIV. I mean, this might have been a Louis XIV wannabe, but he doesn't have it here. He doesn't have it in terms of resources. And it's irritating to hear it from these subjects because we want some power too. We're expecting a little sharing. And from him, they don't necessarily get it. So it's like wrong throne, wrong time. Just everything is wrong for this poor soul. Another famous painting of him. He didn't necessarily not want to have Parliament, but he basically wants them to say, may it please your grace. Could we please give you our opinion and you could act on this? But he realizes that even in the early part of his reign, that they're basically speaking up too much. They are trying to make too many assumptions to get their piece of the pie, if you want to say it that way. And the interesting thing is that within a few years, he sends one home. He had that power. At that point, he could still call them when he wants them and send them home when he wants to. And they can't say, we don't want to leave. We like it here. So you just suck it up, buddy. No, they got to leave when he says so. But he says, that's it. I'm irritated. They put me in a bad mood. So we just won't meet again. See how you like that. Well, you know what that means. If you don't want to have Parliament, we're talking some serious budgeting. That's right. We got to cut some costs. Because if you don't have Parliament, how are we going to enact new taxes? There will be a major financial issue. But he will avoid calling one for 11 years, which will require some masterful financing. And it'll be done in ways, of course, that very few like, because we are talking April, the month of taxes, and we think about that. What they will do, this is called creative taxing, revenue enhancers, and other terms hurtful to taxpayers, because we understand, of course, that the government can be very creative. In this case, they more or less will make people pay taxes they never paid before. The government had been sort of, shall we say, slack, and now they will even tax you. Let us say you would reach the income level that you could have gotten a knighthood. You say, you mean you could be like Sir Paul McCartney, Sir Elton John, or people of that sort. Yes, you made that income and you said, I just don't think I want to be a knight. Well, that's fine. Then you pay a tax for that. You say, but that's not fair. Well, loser, you pay it anyway. I don't care whether you like it or not. You could have been a knight. You'd say, but that's, it's like all of these various tax opportunities. And we're talking 1629 and 1640, world of taxation that will be brought about to try to cover the king's needs, because the royal government is expensive and it doesn't require Parliament. That's the main thing. We can charge them for all this and we don't have to see those sassy people in Parliament, because they are sassy, like we always talk, don't you sass me, that. Yeah, we don't have that, because everybody in the royal government's, bending and scraping and saying, you're wonderful, you're number one, we love you. I mean, every day is Valentine's Day, right? I mean, it's like everything is about it. But this is a famous Van Dyke, which again is an opportunity to push trips to London and the National Portrait Gallery, because there is just all of this Stuart art which was done. But again, you always wonder what was going on in that head of his. Was he thinking, God and me, we're so tight? Or was he thinking, gosh, I love my wife and my children are amazing? Or is he thinking that Parliament, may they rot in the place of fire? We just don't know. Maybe we weren't thinking anything like, how much longer do I have to stand here? Just something mundane like that. But the portraits go on and on of this man. But let's not forget the man pictured here. As far as Henrietta Maria is concerned, she is definitely no friend of Anglicans. As I say, being the daughter of Henry IV, who is rather manipulative with religion, and whose mother is a Medici, an Italian woman, who's was Queen of France only because of all of her money. I mean, it's just very ironic that now Henrietta Maria, their daughter, turns out, super Catholic, but she is. Now, many of you love dogs, and or you have dog family that you will understand Henrietta Maria was seriously into dogs. You say, but she had so many children. Well, we have servants for that. Okay, but we can love our dogs on our own. What she liked to do is, and you Episcopalians will appreciate this, whenever there's going some service like communion or anything like that, she'll be out with a romp with the dogs, and then she would send them in. Oh, yeah, exactly. Because being a Catholic, I guess she felt discriminated against. Y'all don't come to my church. Let's see how you like. Sick, go. And you can just imagine the dogs don't care. They don't care about the Book of Common Prayer, and like, it's amazing to read the stories about that, but apparently Charles did not hold that against her. Now, as far as the man here, he is an individual about whom I have strong opinions, and many people do. His name was William Laud. He's very famous in this period. Short fellow. He was already Bishop of London, but unbelievably, King James I, during his day, sort of gave him, ratemybishop.com. He would have given him maybe 2 stars and said, he's probably as high as he needs to be because he's really too picky and he can't get that kind of position within the church where we can have a little of this and a little of that and just leave it all alone. Unless somebody comes out and says, I want to have, all kinds of different views. And if we just everything can just work out, one of those mishmash types, moderate, but not law. Law says there's one way, my way. And this is the person who will be a major influence in Charles' reign. Because, of course, he is Archbishop of Canterbury. And again, James would not have been happy, but he's gone. So now Charles makes him. Laud believed it's almost like a revival of Catholicism without the Pope. It was even said that, I don't know if this is true or not, but the Pope secretly sent him a message. Hey, Lord, could you imagine? Sir, you want to be a cardinal? Maybe you're so Catholic and we got some good reports on you. Can you imagine that? Sending messages, secret messages, little love notes and saying, you kind of like you. Thinking maybe that England is coming back to the Catholic Church. Well, that ain't going to happen, please. But Laud loved the ceremony. He loved what Low Church Episcopalians used to call all the falderal of the upper level of the Episcopal Church. Some of you know what I'm talking about, the high church, when emphasis on ceremony, not on sermons, emphasis on ritual, lots and lots of ornateness. And some of you will know exactly to what I refer. And you say, well, that's fine if he wants to do it that way, but maybe some people don't care for that. We'll let them do what they want. Oh, no, we do it my way. It's a policy which I think is appropriately called thorough. And what does thorough mean? It means if you don't agree, you're in trouble. You're a loser. And you're going to pay for it in ways that are most unpleasant. And we will see that coming up. The ritual, the formality, the high church. When members of Parliament or others will talk about, we don't need all this Catholic stuff. By Catholic stuff, they mean ritual, we just need the Bible, we need good preaching, and we're fine. And Laud said, oh no, that's not the way we'll do it. And people might say, okay, but you know what? They were lying. When the mouse went, the cat played. And the idea the mice will play when the cat's away. And So some of these clergy are really what we call Puritans. You say, what does that mean? It means they want pure Christianity. They don't care about ritual. They don't care about services. They don't care about the priest being, they don't even want you to use the word priest. They want preaching, good preaching, and singing, and all this other business, all this falderall. That's Babylonian. That's like popes. So if that is the case, what do? We send around inspectors, agents. You know, they were old song, Secret Agent Man. Yeah, sort of like we would send around. That's the truth, though. They would send around people and find pastors, rectors of churches who were conducting services without using the ritual. And you take notes, and then you're going to turn them in. Spies. So that Lord was really up to a lot of ideas. He was backed up by the king. The king was very high church too. They called it, by the way, in a term, the beauty of holiness. That is, that services are supposed to be beautiful. You say, well, the preaching and the Bible, that's beautiful. Well, I'm sorry, but that's not what they have in mind here. They want the whole hullabaloo, like you would see if you go to England and see the services there, I suppose, still are quite ornate, or at least some places. So the thorough policy means that some people don't like it. If you don't like it, you need to get out, because we are not up for everything is beautiful in its own way. No, it's not. You're a loser and we don't like you. So either conform or get punished. Puritans, in many cases, as we all know, ended up in New England, and some in the Netherlands. Places, in other words, that Calvinists could be saved, because Laud and people of that sort believed heavily in free will. I don't want to get into theology with you, gosh, but just enough that you understand that will become very important, that these folks that disagree with Laud believed in predestination, and Laud and company believed in free will and the utility of good works and all the rest of it. And if you didn't agree, and you're thinking, well, I'm not leaving, I want to stay in England. Okay, we have other plans for you. And the plans could include what they call cropping of the ears. And yeah, I know. I started thinking about that. Ear cropping. Some of you may have heard of this with dogs and other animals. And apparently, maybe it's good for them. I don't know much about veterinary practice, but I don't think it would be good. I kept playing with mine thinking, I just can't believe this would feel good. But that was done. Oh, and branding. Now, I know folks like tattoos, and that's fine. I don't have any. I know you're surprised. But if I had any tats, I would show them. But I just did not get in. I miss tattoos somehow. And the idea is now, when I see them, I'm thinking, what is the word? Excruciating. I think they've had cocktails prior to the tattoo, my opinion. But I cannot imagine someone. Well, anyway, the idea though is that branding and ear shearing were common to punish those who defied Laud's practice. And again, Laud was not running for most popular archbishop, you know, Mr. Congeniality. He was set up. So we can assume he's anti-Puritan, definitely. And that was definitely fine. The problem was messing with the Scots. Yes, they had a sentimental attachment, these Scottish people, to King Charles I. He was a Scot. He had a Scottish accent, for goodness sakes. We never forget that he was brought up when a little boy in Scotland. We all talk like we learned when we were children. So the idea is that when Laud, supported by King Charles, decides to move his ideas into Scotland, there's going to be a world of hurt, because the Scots do not want to follow the ideas of Laud. This will be, in fact, unpopular in the extreme, because they must have gotten all of these books of common prayer, all these copies, and put them in the churches. And these Scots are just sort of saying, throwing them out. You've been to Edinburgh and St. Giles and the great churches there. Well, they don't use prayer books. They're Calvinists. So, I mean, so now Laud's agents are up there passing out copies. Say, now this will be the service you'll use. Oh, and those Scots act real ugly. Yes. And they're sassy. And believe you me, the royal government doesn't like it in the least. But the Scots refuse to accept it, and we're going to have some serious problems there. But that's not the only problem. I always thought this was a very attractive portrait. Thomas Wentworth, the Earl of Strafford, he will become the king's money man. He's the one that, next to Laud, he's right up there. They're like Mutt and Jeff, you know, they're right there by us, the king, and then he has his two people. He has Laud for religion and this man for, yeah, folding stuff. He's the one who develops that idea of everybody has to pay. If you don't accept a knighthood, you just say, I don't think that's a very good investment. And you say, oh, really? Then you're going to pay a fine for that. And you say, but that's not fair. Really? That's too bad about you then. I mean, yeah. So, but again, if you go to work for the IRS, and bless their hearts, I know it's a hard job. I hope they get a good retirement. I really do. I mean that, because it's got to be difficult. But that said, you're not running for most popular to be an agent of the IRS. And I mean that in a nice way, in case there's somebody who knows. God, just the idea. I remember my father coming in and said, we're being audited, and just the idea just, I mean, gives me the creeps, you know? So that, just a little aside. So he had lots and lots of power. For 11 years, he brought in enough revenue for the royal government. They didn't have to call a parliament. And can you imagine all of those rich, important people, all those nobles sitting at home fuming? Huge. I mean, it's not like they say, oh, well, if the king's okay, we're happy too, and we're just glad. No, they want to get there because our power, we're important people. Yeah. We're not peasants. The idea, of course, of the various kinds of taxes and revenues. Do I need to say or not? Like people say, I'm just glad to pay my fair share. Maybe I need to be paying more, Sometimes I hear that, and Dennis, you may too, on public radio, they say, why don't you just, this year you can just raise your donation, your monthly donation. I always think, oh boy, no matter how much, they'll always find a way, right? More. Yeah. Why stop? Yeah. Amen. I mean, yeah, we don't have to. There's no self-control here. Give. And I think that probably has a lot to do with the revenue enhancement as pictured by Wentworth, who is AKA Earl Stratford, because the king loves me. That's why we got to be the Earl of Stratford, really. I mean, these people, as I said, are very, very important to the king. But thanks to Laud and Scotland, the day will come. They can put up with a lot in Scotland, but they can't put up with the Book of Common Prayer. It's amazing, isn't it? I tell you, it's amazing the significance of religion, that they would cross into England. I think they loved Charles in a way, but in another way, they definitely resented and got riled about religion. So he had to call Parliament, that is the king. And thanks to that, both Wentworth and Laud, not immediately, but coming, 1641, then Laud in 1645 will be executed. I think that's more like the king's ministers cause these bad things to happen. That's the fiction up to that point. But that will be done by Parliament and the execution of the king's major officials. So Parliament becomes, both Lords and Commons, very, very powerful. And it will be noted the king would have, his day will be in 1649. So he'll have time to think about it, that he did not put up a strong fight for his ministers. I don't mean he liked it that they were executed, but he doesn't do a lot about it. The Parliament that is now meeting, this is the Parliament that was called because the Scots are coming, and that's why he called that Parliament. Will be called the Long Parliament because in many ways it just went on and on and on. And it goes on for a lot of significant events in English history. It's fair to say that the Long Parliament and the king never got along. When you read some of the documents, it'll always be like, may it please your majesty, can the church be freed of all popery? and this and that and the other. May the king, may the royal government learn to live on the assigned revenues, you know, polite way of saying you better cut back. But there's no question that the Parliament, representing many of the most important elements, could not reach agreement with the monarchy, and so there would be civil war. I mean, it's a long, complex process, which I'm certainly not giving justice to, but it's fair to say that it does not happen just overnight. You ultimately, though, come to the conclusion that the king believed that he was answerable only to God, and Parliament was assuming more and more that its rights to, what would we call it today, power sharing, because it was part and parcel. And this is, of course, much of what was being led to in the Middle Ages, back in the 13th century, when, oh my gosh, and who would forget? Nobody in this room, Simon de Montfort. I feel his spirit all around me as I talk. I just think, oh God, yeah. Picks up the heart rate. Yeah. Because I think, God, he would just be going on and saying, yeah, do it, fellas, come on. Yeah, that's why I love the 13th century so much, as I know they're there, even though I'm doing 17th century. Lord, how many books have been written on this subject? And the subject is who supported which side. You would think, really? Yes. Many careers have been based on writing simply on the demographics of who was pro-monarchy and who was pro-parliament. It's hard to determine that. The generalizations are, and they are general. Please understand that it's general, because otherwise it all seems so clear that one side, the other side. It's like, what part of the country are we, what part of England, I should say? You know, they're Northern England or Southern England, or upper class or middle class or religion. But in general, if you are from the country, if you are from the better off families, if you're Catholic or Anglican, you tend to be pro-royal. Well-to-do people, Calvinists, or what I call independents, and we're going to explain that in a few minutes. If you're urban, you tend to be for Parliament. You can find as many exceptions as you want to, geographically, religiously, you know, as just human beings. But there is no doubt that this was a serious division within the people, or at least I should say the people of means. Now, say I am a poor peasant. I work every day. I don't know how to read and write. And you say, well, how do I fit in? I don't think you do too much, okay? You are not part of this. I'm saying this isn't like the Wars of the Roses fans. We are reaching down a bit into what we call the middle class, you know, well-to-do merchants and so forth, because they're more literate people, let's face it. But in the 17th century, there's still a lot of folks who don't have education, who are not literate. It would seem to me that they are not so involved because they're going to have a hard life regardless. I mean, it's not like, well, I want that parliament to win. I think I'll have greater rights and more opportunity at agricultural improvement. I just don't see that. I still see this great mass of the unwashed, if you will, who are not so involved. That doesn't mean there are not a lot of people, but I don't think, as we look at this, you don't think everybody in England is taking sides. But there are. Anybody of education who has any kind of means will be involved one way or the other. And one major issue, of course, and I think the primary issue will be religion, as we'll see. The parliamentary position will evolve because the people who are really in charge, and of course, you know, we're getting to the big OC, Oliver Cromwell. At first, of course, we have what I'll call the moderates will say, well, all the only reason we're fighting is so we can show the king that we want to share. Yeah, I know. And you say, well, that'll work for you this month. But next month, we're going to have a different set of, what we say, war aims. Yeah. You know, talking about earlier, World War I. It's like, you know, at first you set this up and say, then the Germans are going to say, well, we want this, but we might take part of the Russian Empire, or we'll take part of France. Yeah, why not? That was last month. We didn't ask for that. Things change. And a lot, of course, has to do with the fact that Parliament will be very successful. And again, it's a very odd thing to think about this man who had seemed to be quite the civilian provincial lawyer will rise out of basic anonymity to take this incredible role. And again, I don't want to think about all the books on him. And I was looking, I think the other day, about, I'd forgotten there's a movie that came out about him in 1970. I don't know how many stars it got, but yeah, I don't think it got 5 stars. So I am not encouraging you to watch. I'm just saying let it go. But maybe those people in 1970 thought it was good to watch it. But Richard Harris, I think, played the part of Cromwell, but I'll leave it to people who know better. If you just look at his eyes, you get that sense of, what should we say, steely determination, because he was carrying out God's will, so we thought. As such, he is an independent. We have to be careful that we separate Presbyterians and independents, because independents want to have the church, Lord knows, no bishops, and none of that Book of Common Prayer yuck. But we don't necessarily want the established church to be the only church. If you don't want to be part of the church, you can be what you want to be, up to a point. I mean, we're not just saying anything goes. But it is interesting when we think about the independence and how that will become important. Cromwell, just a member of Parliament, will rise in authority, become a major military figure, and lead that army against the king's forces. And the king's forces, some of you will be aware, were led, in fact, to victory over the royal army, which was led by the king's nephew, who's named Prince Rupert. I've always loved that name. He was the son of Elizabeth. You remember her? She was not the Queen Elizabeth, but one of the daughters of King James. Don't mean to get into family genealogy here, but just to note, there were lots of good military figures, but it would appear that this was an army led by Cromwell that felt that God was on their side. The capture of King Charles was humiliating for the royal supporters, as we can imagine. And this was in the middle of the deaths of Wentworth and Laud, by the way. And at first, before Laud's death and execution in 1645, I think they probably gave the king, even though obviously he was in a bad situation, under the parliamentary force, the Roundheads, if you will, that he was going to be in great harm. But he just didn't know how much. No one did. But in 1648, after these two were dead, the trial began. And again, this is a very dramatic situation. Many of you will remember the trial of Louis in French history, because you got me thinking about 1792, 93. But the idea, and when they told King Charles, you know, you're going on trial. So can you imagine his lawyers are saying, and you know what he's saying? Who can try me? Who can try us? Excuse the pronoun. We're not just me. We're plural, because I am England. Okay? Really? There he is. And they start rattling off, you know, the people versus Charles Stuart and all of that. And he's going like, you're kidding me. You're kidding us. You're saying you can try me? Oh, you don't look like God. You know, it's like, you just can't believe these people. I think, what do they say? Cheeky? You're being rather cheeky. Because I am the state. I am England. How? You know, and it's just on and on. And finally, he just shuts up. And so that's the end. I mean, they go on, don't you? You know how folks like to talk. So they will just go on and on and on about all the crimes of Charles Stuart against the people, blah, blah, blah. But I think by this point, Charles knows his days are numbered. The family, Henrietta Maria and so forth, had, as far as I know, all already gone to France by this point. Maybe there were, Charles II might still have been, the future Charles had been there to kind of help with any kind of last resistance. But he will be found guilty, and that'll be the end. thought I had. Let's see again. That's it. I love this quotation by Archbishop of Laud, because that just, now this is Laud, remember, who got his job from the king. But look what he said about the king. Mild and gracious prince who knew not how to be or how to be made great. Ooh. I mean, you know, that hurts. Because it's not like he came so close. I mean, it's like, we tried. We did everything too. But you're just the big M, mediocrity. And that hurts. I don't think he must have said it to King Charles in person. Hey, man, you're mediocre. But we understand that it's a fair assessment, especially when spoken by someone who must have known Charles intimately. In any event, the royal family was not around for the events to occur. And of course, that was this terrible event of January 1649, which must have been very, very cold. So I think he had some sort of chest protectant, or, I mean, to keep him warm temporarily. Yeah. You just can't imagine that there would be such a crowd, but I don't know, maybe people would come out in droves if we had public executions
You
again.
don't see that king get killed every day.
Well, that's true. That's special. Yeah, that's not ordinary. But I thought, to see the boy with his hands out there, I'm thinking, did you notice that see a little boy there at the side? And you think, why would you want that blood? I mean, is it for some sort of experiment, or no? Or is it like a souvenir, like an eBay thing, or is it? And then I came up with my theory. Relic. Because, yeah, I know, spoken like a medievalist. I'm always thinking about holy objects. And, oh, I got the blood. And you say, well, not for us Catholics, because he's going to hell. I understand that. But if you're high Anglican, hey, pretty nice blood. Okay. You know? Just a theory, just a theory. So now, how about a cliche for you? Cross the Rubicon? Because once you have shed the blood of a king, you can't say, dear Stuarts, we really miss you and love you very much. We are sorry about the late unpleasantness with your father. And we love you and want you to come home. Sincerely yours, Parliament. No, in the words of the old song, ain't no way, because it isn't going to happen. Nope, that's done. So, right after that, they do away with the monarchy, and we won't need the House of Lords anymore. We just have the House of Commons. Thank you very much. We'll have a Council of State. Oh, in that Church of England, we won't be needing that either. We've got some great changes. But it's not for any of us to think, oh, gosh, it's going to be democracy. Yeah, let's have some democracy. Men and women, poor and rich, all holding on. And we are the world, we are the children. No, get over it. We're not ready. This is the 17th century, folks. But it does mean that at least for a time, there will be indeed a very, very different and strange world coming. A world in which Cromwell, this member of Parliament, major military leader who believed himself called by God, will now, thanks to his charisma, become, forgive me, a kind of second Simon de Montfort. There are many differences between the two, I'll grant you that. But the idea of this individual saying, I am on a kind of divine mission, and whether there is a king or not, God has called me to set things the way they should be. With what was called, as Frank told us, the Rump Parliament, meaning that there was, thanks to Parliament's army, a cleansing of Parliament. Because the Presbyterians who did not agree with Simon de Montfort, they were sent home. Your services won't be needed. Is this fair? Well, he thought so. That is Oliver Cromwell. The Rump Parliament then means the members of Parliament who are left. And that is to say those who more or less agreed with Simon de Montfort. Probably less than more, but he had them, and then he had a council of state. And for a while, well, really about 8 or 9 years, this kind of government was what they would have. There would not be Presbyterians around. Again, Presbyterians and Anglicans wanted the state church. And if you don't agree with that, you could be in serious problem. Cromwell's view, which he enforced, was there may be a church, but you do not have to accept it. It's sort of like you can have toleration. Now, that doesn't mean everybody can accept it. It just means what they call independence. And some say this could lead to the Baptists or the Quakers or all these groups. It always blows my mind to think all these people are out there and just waiting for a time. I'm out. I can do what I please. And I've been pretending the Church of England was the only one around, and now we're all out. But that's what occurs in this period. These incredible groups just come out and say, we're here. You remember the levelers and the diggers and the shakers and all these folks. Where'd y'all come from? I mean, it's just like, it's amazing. It blows my mind sometimes to think about, they wouldn't have been out, you know, parading around. But in this period, in part because of Cromwell, they're out there. It doesn't mean that Cromwell thinks they're right. Nor does it mean that everybody enjoys the same rights. He had problems with Jews, Catholics. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's not like you Pope lovers, you just keep your trap shut. And those Unitarians, woo, but most groups, y'all come. Unless you make the X list, religion's not allowed. He's independent Puritan, independent Puritan, that means he's not a Presbyterian because he allows others. They're wrong, but they can, so it's kind of tolerant, it's kind of not tolerant. And as I said, there are all kind of groups who just come out of the woodwork, and it's very, very interesting. There is actually an Auburn PhD, and she wrote about, and it was long, about the secret Anglican church. She did. Yeah, because you had to be sort of closeted. And yeah, it's kind of an interesting work to read. But so in case you ever get that you want to know more, I can set you on the path to finding out all you need to know, but we're afraid to ask about Anglicans during this period. Impress all your friends and relatives with your knowledge about closeted Anglicans. That went on during this period. You know, it's always funny. You think Cromwell will maintain an anti-Dutch policy. You say, but I thought the Dutch are Calvinists. Shouldn't we be bonding? Well, there's one thing called religion, then there's another called money and profit. And just say the English and the Dutch had differing ideas about who should rule the Atlantic and the trade routes that were going on to the New World. So all of this, in essence, tells us that Cromwell maintained a policy that led to 3 wars with the Dutch. So he was maintaining a vigorous policy, as he was with that Ireland. And believe me, go to Dublin and say, I heart Cromwell, and expect problems. That name is rated X. Or maybe I should say XXX. The name of Cromwell and his policies against Catholics is never to be forgotten. I'd love to kibitz maybe an Irish school and say, what, I wonder that lesson about Ireland under Cromwell, and what he would say, oh, it's not good, not a lot of positive things, because he really was not, let's just say he was very anti-Catholic. So that particular part of Cromwell's policies are well known. And again, like my friend Simon de Montfort, it's like so often with these great people with charisma, sometimes people don't agree, and that's very hurtful. You know, it's like we want everybody to say, you know, you're right. And frankly, during this period, I guess people feel a lot freer to say my idea is better than your idea. And the result, of course, as often happens, is going to be a lot of disorder, a lot of disagreement about policy, that the king, or rather Cromwell, will not be able to maintain control over all of the different views. Oh, at times he would just send people home. It'll be more or less a situation. Well, if you don't agree, then possibly you don't need to be here. I mean, can you imagine that? Yeah, I mean, that's the way it goes. Because he felt very strongly that God was speaking through him. Well, if so, then you're just a jerk and wrong. So leave. And he would say, in the name of God, get out. They have incidents when that just sends the bare bones parliament. All of that just to understand that he never was able to make it work for him. And he died, as we can all imagine, a frustrated man. In 1658, he had accepted, they call him Lord Protector, and but they said, oh, we'd like you to be King Oliver the First, and he wouldn't do that. And I think Mrs. Cromwell still shopped and went to the market. I guess middle class ways are hard to shed. But the fact is that once he died, his son, Richard, tried to maintain the authority with sometimes called Poor Dick Cromwell. Poor Dick, because he could not maintain his father's authority. It's like whatever authority there is, he had it. And it's not like a monarchy. It's not like James I, Charles I. You just can't pass it on, I guess, at that particular time. As far as I'm aware, that's the first time they've tried something like that in terms of monarchs, non-monarchs, I should say. Now, these are the routes that I was speaking of, the trade routes with which the the English and the Dutch fought over. Let me move on here, if I may. Here it is. The Godly Republic, as it would be known during this period, comes to an end then, because Richard just couldn't do it. Richard Cromwell couldn't do anything with it. So one of the generals, who was, shall we say, a moderate, and he had a great deal of authority, was able to get in communication with the royal family. This is always amazing. I imagine they had some budgetary issues too, wouldn't you think? The funding issue. Yeah. You always think, oh, you're royalty wherever you are. No, you have to live on family charity. Have you ever thought about that? You said, we're running a little short this month. Well, I don't want to have to do that. I don't think they did either. So when General Monk made this sort of overture, Charles, that is the late king's son, will respond, well, he's probably kind of chilly. Well, I mean, to kill your father, I think you'd be a little chilly. But we understand that now the Long Parliament was back. That is that Parliament from yesteryear. They came back and they officially invited Charles to return as King Charles II. And you say, well, there's going to be a lot to swallow. Yes. They did chop my father's head off. But it's good to be king, as they say in the movie. So maybe we can do this and not bring too much up that's unpleasant. And we'll start with Charles II and the age of debauchery. Next time, our very last time, sad to say. And I look forward to that next week. Okay, please come. Thank you. Thank you.
I like the part where Cromwell said he wanted to cut his head off with the crown still on.
Oh, yeah.
That's a lovely one.